Hello, everyone, as you join us. Thanks for making the time to join us this evening. My name is Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's Books. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we're located in Portland, Oregon, in the heart of Multnomah Village. We've been around for 42 years now, and we are still plugging along. We've met some more people here, despite all the stuff that's going on. Yay, people are streaming in. This is awesome. I'm gonna have to keep admitting people before I can continue here. All right. For those of you who just came in, my name is Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's. And our store is currently closed to browsing, but there are staff there every day from it's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. on weekdays now, and 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. on the weekends. They love to hear from people, so shoot them an email, give a call, talk about books, get a book recommendation. They would love that. If you can't do that or don't want to do that, our website is always open. It's annieblooms.com, so you can go there day and night and order books, books that are going to be presented here tonight. We have curbside pickup, local delivery within 3 miles, and some shipping options. So we have some great events coming up after this one. On March 9th, Philip Margolin, local mystery author, is going to be reading from his newest Robin Lockwood thriller, A Matter of Life and Death. Then on one more person. Then on the 30th of March, we have Emmeline Duncan, also known as Kelly Garrett. She's got a new mystery novel coming out called Fresh Brewed Murder. She'll be joined by a trio of other Northwest mystery authors. And on April 6th, Jamie Yurdon will be reading from his forthcoming novel, The Space Between Two Deaths. Tonight, we are delighted to be hosting Meg Weber for the live stream launch of her debut memoir, A Year of Mr. Lucky. She's going to be in conversation with Josh Mohr. He's got a forthcoming memoir, Model Citizen, that comes out a month from tomorrow. Both books can be pre-ordered from the event page on our website. I'm going to post the link here in the chat so you can get over there. And people are chatting. Yay, good to see. Right now, here comes that link. No, now it comes. There we go. All right, there's the link. So you can go and buy the books there. And I think we forgot to talk about signing, but hopefully we can get some signatures. Either authors can come to the store, to our basement, and do a safe distance signing, or sign some book plates to send to us, something like that. So put a note in the comments if you'd like a signature or an inscription, and we'll try to make that happen. There's going to be some reading and some questions from Josh to Meg, and then there'll be a Q&A session at the end. So that is the format. Year of Mr. Lucky, that's Meg's new book. Someone else is coming in. Is when Meg Weber, a recently divorced queer single parent, realizes she's ready to date again, she comes across the profile of Mr. Lucky. He's a smart dominant with similar interests, but not all goes as planned. In her memoir, Meg takes us through her journey of erotic encounters, pain and pleasure, explorations of self-worth, submission, yearning, and healing. Here's a quote from Lydia Yuknovich, author of Chronology of Water. She says, "This book is a political act where the story of desire, loss, power, pleasure, pain, and standing up take on phenomenal new meanings." And then Josh is here with us. He has a good blurb for it too. "I could gush on the million inspiring literary feats Meg Weber has pulled off in this memoir, but I'll highlight her authorial eye. Weber never flinches, but writes into the messiness of being alive with hard-won, painful poignancy. She's the real deal." Meg Weber writes memoirs about sex, grief, love, family therapy, and tangled relationships. There's supposed to be a comma between family and therapy there. Meg's writing gives voice to the ways her life continues to unfold outside the boundaries prescribed for her. She's a queer mental health therapist who specializes in gender and sexuality, an adjunct instructor in counselor education, and a clinical supervisor. She lives in her hometown of Portland, Oregon, with her teenager and their labradoodle named Portland. Model Citizen, that's Josh's book that's coming out in a month. After years of hard-won sobriety while rebuilding a life with his wife and young daughter, Joshua Mohr suffers a stroke at the age of 35, his third, it turns out. And we have to admit someone else in here. It's his third, it turns out, which uncovers a heart condition requiring surgery and fentanyl, one of his myriad drugs of choice. This forced free lapse should fix his heart, but what will it do to his sobriety? What if it doesn't work? Told in stunning, surreal, time-hopping vignettes, Model Citizen is a raw, revealing portrait of an addict. Mohr shines a harsh spotlight into all corners of his life, throwing the wild joys, tragedies, embarrassments, and adventures of his past into bold relief. A darkly beautiful, funny, incisive confession, Model Citizen is brimming with hope and resilience, drawing the universal and human out of every moment. About Josh, he is the author of the memoir Sirens and of several novels, including Damascus, which New York Times called Beat Poet Cool. His novel All This won the Northern California Book Award. He is the founder of Decant Editorial. Now welcome, Meg and Josh.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. I'm so honored. And thanks, of course, to Michael and Annie Blooms for hosting, and to Josh for being here and being in conversation with me. So, okay. So everybody else has their mic off, so I guess that means I'm supposed to read. So I think I'll do that. With a little bit of introduction. So what I'm going to read to you is the first time that Mr. Lucky and I meet. Prior to this, we have been corresponding via email for roughly 3 weeks, just across town in Portland, but that's how long it took until we met in person. So there was a fair amount of anticipation and sexual tension built up. So this is scene number 1, and it's the date it happens is June 21st, 2013. I am driving across town to meet Sir for the first time. Sarah Bareilles is singing Brave on repeat, and I will myself to heed her lyrics and let my words be anything but empty. I arrive in his neighborhood too early. His street comes into view, but I drive past and turn a corner to circle the block, hoping that my memory of a gas station nearby is accurate, since the orange fuel light is staring me down from the dashboard. Anxiety swirls in my belly as I pull into the gas station. How will we fit with each other? Our words weave tantalizing stories back and forth. Will our bodies know how to do the same? Will our verbal play transfer from writing to speaking? Will our desire manifest in real life the way it does on the screen? The radio interrupts the music streaming from my phone when I turn off the engine. Tom Petty's Into the Great Wide Open starts to play, and I grin. We discussed this album in our first email exchange. This feels like a good omen. With the tank full, I drive back to his street, willing myself to chill the fuck out. I'm still a couple minutes early. Across from his house, I park the car and silence the music. The only sounds are my quick, nervous breaths. I gather my purse and the offering of fresh raspberries I've brought for him. A surprising calm settles in my center as I walk toward his front door. I feel sexy and strong, ready. I knock and he answers right away. My breath freezes in my throat as I realize he's even more handsome than I imagined. His profile pictures on his dating profile did not do him justice. He's in jeans and a t-shirt with a warm smile in his brown eyes. Notice isn't a strong enough word for how this attraction lands in my body. As he pushes open the screen door to let me in, I step back and nearly fall off the front porch. So much for my graceful entrance. I cross the threshold into his outstretched arms, hugging me hello. It's nice to finally lay eyes on you, I say, desperate to regain my composure. I brought you these, I add, handing over the berries. He thanks me and begins to show me around his house. The space is warm and inviting. His style complements my own, which is not going to help me keep any of this in perspective. I remind myself that this is a casual play relationship, no strings attached. He leads me through the kitchen to a room that is part art studio, part living room. One wall is lined with paintings, bold, colorful, modern art canvases. Most of the other walls hold shelves and shelves of books. There are plants and framed photographs. He's literate, artistic, sexy. The word game beckons from a low table in the living room studio. I set my purse down and grab the soda I brought with me. He's already poured himself a glass of red wine. I perch anxiously on a chair near the table. The chair is too deep for me. If I sit back, my feet won't reach the floor, and I need all the grounding force I can manage right now. He notices my discomfort, goes to the kitchen for a smaller wooden chair. You'll be more comfortable in this. I thank him, and we begin the game. Small talk winds its way in figure eights between us. We are strangers in person, but have exchanged so many words via email that intimacy already hums, connecting us. He rattles off something about house rules for the game, and I laugh, more to myself than at him. Of course, this top has his own rules for the game. We take our turns, mingling conversation with the quiet, determined focus of finding the right next word to place on the board. Is Meg short for Margaret? No, Megan. I resist telling a longer story about my name, decide instead to ask where he grew up and whether he has siblings. He confirms his Midwest roots. I knew he wouldn't sound like he was from here. He has a sister. I explain about my large family and being a Portland native. He keeps score, his own tally quickly climbing thanks to strategic plays on double word scores, while mine grows at a much slower pace. He attempts modesty, which I find endearing. I'm just getting all the good letters. It isn't true. He's trouncing me like we both knew he would. I'm nervous enough to just be grateful I can spell. We both smile at words with any hint of suggestion. Rope, suck, command. We're enjoying each other. I'm less shy than we both feared and can hold my own in our banter. I catch him off guard asking about the one overlapping connection I discovered in my brief Google search once he shared his last name. It turns out he's in a band with a friend of one of my friends, one small degree of separation that is daunting to him. I see it flash across his face as surprise and mild concern. We pick up threads of discussions we've had online, ask additional questions. With no limit here in person, I revert to my over-inquisitive nature. I pause the game to step outside and call my friend Emily, following through with my now obviously unnecessary safety plan. He will not harm me. I am not in any danger. I quickly gush that things are going well and promise to call her when I leave. We finish the game, my score dismal compared to his. I excuse myself to the bathroom, sneak a look at my phone to reread our scene opening ritual. It feels likely I'll get to use those words. When I return, he catches my eye and asks, "Are you game?" My shy, giddy smile says, "Fuck yeah, I'm game," but I answer, yes. I move toward the kitchen chair, make eye contact again, and ask, "Should I return this to the kitchen?" With this question, the dynamic shifts. Yes, do. The set of his gaze and tone of his voice suddenly have an edge of command they weren't infused with before. This change reverberates in my own pulse. I replace the chair and remind myself on the short walk back that I'm allowed to want this. I am choosing to offer myself to him. I enter the room as he finishes shutting the open windows and lowers the shades. He faces me with a look of challenge and invitation in his eyes and takes a seat on the couch. I'll let you start us off then. I settle myself on my knees before him and take a slow breath. One more dose of grounding before we take off. Invoking our scene opening ritual, my eyes locked with his, a spark of desire ignites in me. I think I see it catch fire in him too, as my words land. While I am here, I am yours to use in any way you choose, sir.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute for a second there.
It's okay.
I was just thinking about what it was like for your position where you couldn't hear from any of us. So that was amazing. Thank you, Meg, for sharing that.
Thank you.
I loved this book when I had the opportunity to read it in galley form. And before we start to say anything, I just want to say congratulations.
Thank you.
Because I think one of the things that's so admirable about your particular style is that this book sounds like you talk. And that doesn't sound like a compliment, but so many memoirists overthink it. And they start to use words like lugubrious all of a sudden, and it makes it sound very academic and not personal. And when I was reading your book, I felt like you were sitting right next to me whispering this in my ear. And that's how the best memoirs sound. So before we say anything else, congratulations on pulling such a wonderful, wonderful book together.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. And I remember I read a much shorter version of that at Writing by Writers in Tahoe, where you and I met. And I think we only had 3 or 4 minutes to read, so I had to pack it in small. And afterwards, you and I had interacted maybe at lunch or something, but we hadn't really met. And you came up to me after the reading and you said, I just want you to know I'm absolutely one of your readers.
Yeah.
And it meant the world to me because I didn't know you from anyone. And so I appreciate, I mean, I knew you were there and you were teaching, but it just meant a lot.
So cool, right? As artists, like we recognize the kindred spirits. You know, when you see somebody else's emotionality on the page and how they're presenting verisimilitude and what they're interested in, I was like, oh my God, we could take a cross-country trip together and get along swimmingly.
Absolutely.
You know, the first question that I wanted to ask you about, which I think is arguably the hardest thing we do as memoirists, which is to take something that is formless, a life, and to try to find some sort of system, some sort of parameters to curate this wild, vast entrance of life experience down into one narrative. So just talk to me about how you were kind of wrapping your head around how to structure this and how it might have changed over the drafting process, and just let us into the process a little bit.
Okay, it's a great question. So I knew pretty early on, I mean, one, as a memoirist, I save everything I write, including. So the fact that he and I spent 3 weeks emailing back and forth, and if anybody thinks there's a lot of email in the book, you don't even know the eighth of it. I cut so much email out because I was so wordy in the emails. Him, not so much, but me, I had a lot of words in there. So I knew that I already had all this source material. So I was hopeful that the emails could somehow become part of the project if I were going to turn this into a book. And then the other pieces that have titles, while this relationship was going on, I needed somewhere to be able to process. And I usually only know what I think and feel about something once I've written about it. So I started a private blog, and that's where most of those other pieces came from. That was how that and therapy and talking to my best friends is how I figured out what was going on for me in this relationship. And then every writing class I've ever taken says, you know, we need cinematic scenes. We need to know what's happening. And so I thought, well, he and I are only in person the 6 times that we play and a couple of other times. So I guess there's my cinematic scenes. So I felt a little bit like, I was going to say following a recipe, but I've never seen a recipe for. So the idea of following a recipe.
Right.
Then the other thing that was an amazing gift is that Mr. Lucky gave me permission to use his emails as he wrote them, which I was really relieved at, because I could have done the work of recreating him as a character, rewriting his emails. And I didn't really want to do that work. I liked that he was presenting himself as the character that he is. So I was really grateful.
How deep into the writing process were you when you asked his consent?
That's a good question. I probably was 2/3 of the way through the first draft. I wrote.
I'd love to know that this was the way to go and that you needed his permission to continue.
Yes. How
Okay.
did I know that? Is that what you said?
Well, I was just curious, like, I would imagine that if it was hanging over your head for 3 drafts, it would kind of get like, holy shit, what if he tells me I can't do it? But you don't want to do it too early, because if he says no, then you're not going to write the goddamn book.
Exactly. That's a delicate balance. Yeah, I definitely didn't want to get 2 or 3 versions, drafts in,
Yeah,
and then have to rewrite the emails. And I was adamant that I wanted part of the book to be epistolary. I didn't want to lose the email, partly because so much of my relationship with him happened in that first 3 weeks when we were negotiating and
right.
figuring out what we were going to do. And then throughout the rest of the relationship, there was good stuff in those emails. I didn't want to lose it.
Well, I feel like every memoirist is trying to find kind of that perfect form to disseminate whatever her content happens to be. And because the book is about a digital relationship turning into an analog relationship, it makes sense that you would want to draw on those primary sources. So I think the book wouldn't work without those various ingredients.
I think so too. I definitely, like I said, had to cut out a lot of the email. Every editor that I worked with told me I just had to slash it. There was too much. Everything at the time, of course, meant something to me. And
Yes.
part of what has been nice about it taking 6 years for this book to come into life is that by now, cut the email. That's fine. I can cut attached to it. I've moved on in my life, which that distance gave me a little bit more of the objectivity I needed to turn this into a compelling story that people would want to read, instead of the email exchanges that I was attached to.
Sure. And kind of the architecture question kind of handles more of kind of the macro form. But I also wanted to ask one more nerd question about form, and that just has to do with sentence construction. One of my favorite sentence writers is a guy named Gary Lutz. And Gary Lutz always talks about trying to be a sentence architect, which is a phrase I've always admired. I would consider you to be a sentence architect too, because you write so viscerally. You're always relying on all 5 senses. You're always making sure that I'm not just seeing stuff, I'm there. What Flannery O'Connor would call experienced meaning. I love that you put me in these rooms. So I was just curious, what is visceral writing to you? And as a writer, how do you do that on the page?
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, I think I wouldn't have thought of myself in those terms. I often think about what Melissa Febos says about every time she writes an essay or a book, she interrogates every single word that's in every sentence. It has to pass that interrogation or it doesn't get to be there.
Yeah.
Hear her talk about that and think, damn, that's a lot of work. I don't feel like I do that in quite that same way. In terms of writing from the senses, I think that comes from 2 main places I can think of. One, the sort of therapist that I am, I'm a mental health therapist in private practice, and I often incorporate what's happening in my clients' bodies. If we're talking about trauma or we're talking about depression or anxiety or joy, I want to know where it's happening in their body.
Wow.
Not because there's a book I can look that up in and it'll tell me exactly what that means, but because I want to know how they're experiencing it. And then I also, I wrote this book primarily in classes in the literary kitchen with Ariel Gore. And one of the things I love about Ariel is what she teaches us in revision. And she has this, I won't give away all the secrets, but she has to go through and make sure that we are including different senses and different sensory experiences in the book. Because if every sensory experience is visual, we're leaving out 4 other aspects of what might be happening for our characters or what we want to affect in our readers.
Yeah.
Has really stuck with me.
Interesting. You mentioned your gig just a second ago. I'd be curious if there are other ways you feel like your profession informs how you approach the compelling story on the page. Are there other things that you're consciously aware of, or is that more happening on an unconscious level?
I think it's more happening on an unconscious level. Definitely the type of emotional processing that I do just by virtue of who I am and the work that I do, I feel like that definitely shows up in the pages of this book and probably everything I write. I've definitely gotten the feedback in writing workshops. Well, of course, you're a therapist, so of course you're going to this and that. And I don't always love those summaries of who I am because I'm just a therapist, but I can't ignore that level of emotional awareness and processing shows up on these pages.
I would imagine, and again, if I'm putting words in your mouth, tell me I'm wrong here, but that would also be a double-edged sword, correct? Because you also don't want to label everything in a book in a clinical way, because once you define an emotion on the page, you limit that emotion. So I would imagine you have to walk kind of that high wire act as well.
Definitely. And I think as I was living through and writing this book, I was figuring out what I was feeling and how it played into the rest of my life while I was writing the book. And I think that that's especially true about the loss that's in the book, but also some of the exploration I did about my family. Right. And how I became the person that I am that would show up into a relationship like this with someone like Mr. Lucky. Yeah. That I was figuring out in real time in my own writing, in the therapy sessions that I show in the book with Gail. Everybody loves Gail as a character in the book. So.
Well, you talk about, your job and then your family. It brings us kind of naturally to ask you a question about your sister. And I don't want to lead you in any sort of direction here, but I would just like to hear, gosh, what was that experience like for you?
The experience of my sister's death, or including the book, or?
Sure, we can start there, but I was more a matter of like, writing a book isn't just this one-off, right? It requires us to revisit and revise and revisit and revise. And that must have been a painstaking ordeal for you.
It was. I also did a fairly good job of avoiding, in some ways, while I was in the relationship with Mr. Lucky, and then also in the writing of this, I spent a whole lot more time obsessing over Mr. Lucky than I did really delving into initially the feelings of grief and loss around my sister. Yeah. Of course, I was devastated and will never be the same after that loss. And I remember sitting in therapy and, I would go on and on about whatever was happening with Mr. Lucky, and Gail would just look at me and she would say, I wonder what else is going on in your world. Wow. If there's anything else that you are feeling lost about or feeling grief over. And of course she had, flashing neon signs, just died. There's other stuff to talk about. And of course she presented it in a way that was gentle. And we both knew I would do all the processing I needed to do when I was ready. Yeah. So. Is there any part of the book that's around your sister that you would like to share with us tonight? Yeah, I do have a short piece that is about my sister. So I'll go ahead and I'll read that. And this is a moment where I need to give a shout out to Lydia Yuknovich. I workshopped this book with her at Writing by Writers in Tahoe. That's where I met you, Josh. And in that very first draft, the book is going along, I'm talking about Mr. Lucky and everything. And then I just sort of dropped in there the fact that my sister had died. I think about him saying that he wouldn't support me when my sister died. I think that was the only mention of it in the whole book. And then, so I remember sitting in workshop with Lydia and her just smiling at me and shaking her head and saying, it actually doesn't work that way. You don't just stop that in the middle of a memoir and keep going. I love it. More beforehand. We need to know your sister and how her being in your life affected you in order to be devastated with you when she dies. Well, I understand why you tried to get away with that, but I'm glad Lydia didn't let you get away with that. Oh, there's no way Lydia was going to let me get away with that, thankfully. So this is a piece called Wardrobe. It's a story I've told so many times, but here are the parts I tend to leave out. As she sits there, huddled under the comforter on my bed, Tracy argues with me about the object of my current obsession. Why would you settle for this guy who doesn't treat you with respect? Why not date someone who is kind to you, who has time and wants you? I try to counter, to explain again how amazing Mr. Lucky is, how when we're together, he's present and attentive. He's sexy and he does want me, I insist. I attempt to distract her with the task at hand. Which shirt with which skirt for my conference? Do I really need 5 pairs of shoes for a week-long conference on shame and vulnerability? Flustered, I turn the tables on her. But what about you, Trace? What are you looking for in your dating life? Her response is subtle, only alarming well after the fact. I don't know that I'm going to make it. I take in her unwashed hair that stands up at odd angles, the sweatshirt she's likely been wearing all week. Her face is expressionless. Her words are a loose thread that I notice, but leave untouched. She throws a pair of leggings at me, hits me in the chest with them. Put these on with that black tank top and the purple cardigan. Apparently, next up is a lesson in leggings. You think you need to wear a skirt over these to cover your butt, right? Yeah, it's more comfortable that way, I admit. But you don't need to. Your legs look great, and they seem so much longer without a skirt cutting them in half. I do what she says, and she's right, in that annoying know-it-all big sister way. I take notes as she packs my suitcase, so I'll remember what to wear when I get to San Antonio for the conference. Without her help, I'd have packed jeans and black t-shirts, maybe one skirt with a black and gray striped shirt, and definitely only 1 pair of shoes. No color, no variety, dull, boring, safe. Safety. I'm not attuned to Tracy's physical risk. I don't know her edge is so close. Every day of the conference, I post photos on social media to show that I'm following her instructions about my outfits. I even wear the ones most outside my comfort zone early in the week, instead of hiding in my drab casual clothes. I call her from the balcony of my hotel overlooking the San Antonio Riverwalk to gush about the conference. I've met amazing therapists from all over the country. The days are long but full of connection. We're learning all about shame resilience and how to show up as our most authentic self. Tracy listens, but she's quiet and subdued, distracted. When we talk, I'm careful with my language, make myself swallow my usual phrases about her day going well or whether she's having fun, because that isn't the tenor of her days. Her stories fall flat. There's not much to tell from inside her depression. That thread from before snags at me, unravels all the way through my chest as the weight sinks in. I can feel the bottom edge of her words, can sense what she might mean. She's desperately unhappy and can't find her way out of it. Our break is over, Trace. It's time to go back in for our next session, I tell her. I'll catch up with you tomorrow. She hangs up, and I listen to the silence for 1 more second.
Oh, thank you, Meg. I would love that. Thank you. Such a nice excerpt to ask about the concept of writing about emotion. You know, how do we write about emotion in such a way that it's going to be meaningful, thoughtful, and seem concrete and real with blood in its veins, without being maudlin and self-sympathetic and all those bad things on the Lifetime channel. You do such a good job in that here, talking about really, really serious things, and yet never slipping into sentimentality. How do you maintain that emotional integrity?
Thank you for all of that. Was that a question at the end? How do I maintain that emotional integrity?
Absolutely.
Oh, darn, I was hoping that wasn't a question. I don't know how the hell to answer that. I think writing the pieces about my sister for the book, you know, they were some of the most difficult pieces for me to write. I am from a really big family. I'm the youngest of 8 kids, and I love all my siblings, and Tracy and I were the closest I was closest to her than any of my other siblings, although I love them all. It's not a competition. And so I've never really known how to put that on the page.
Yeah.
Hard to talk about it. Even now, I'm stumbling over my words. You know, losing Tracy was not my first experience of loss, but it's one that absolutely changed the core of who I am. And that is a difficult thing to put on the page. And it was really important to me to include her in the book, not just because Lydia said I had to, although, but to honor her. And, you know, that was really important to me. And it was really important to me to include her in my reading tonight, so that because she was a really big supporter of me and my writing. And so I needed to make sure that she got to be here too.
I'm
And
glad you honored her. It's good.
siblings are here tonight, and that really means a lot to me that
Yeah.
they're here. So
Well said. Well, I can keep asking you questions, but why don't we see if anybody else wants to jump in and fling a question at Meg? I've set quite a high bar, so I don't want to hear any dumb questions.
Welcome to unmute yourselves and ask, or you can type questions into the chat and I can ask them. Whatever you'd like to do.
Or I'll just keep asking questions.
that works.
Wait, Chris has a question. Can you unmute
Okay,
yourself? Okay.
Chris.
Sorry, I think I muted you again, Chris. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Just trying to unmute you.
Zoom meetings. Hi, Meg. Thanks for sharing those excerpts. And I'm so excited about your book. And this might be one of the first author events I've been to where the book hadn't actually manifested yet. So I'm so excited to get it in my hands. I pre-ordered it from Annie Bloom's a while ago. Michael, could you please get me the book? But I was curious, like, I think when you become a writer, like one of the goals, maybe not the only goal, but certainly goal is to be published and have a book. So how does the fact that you now have a book change you? Is it less motivating or more motivating? I'm just kind of curious how it's affected you that you're going to have a book with your name on it tomorrow.
I know, tomorrow, that's the thing. My copies of the books haven't arrived yet. So I think that part will feel a little bit more real tomorrow. It's more motivating to me. I was just thinking about this yesterday, that now I've done this the first time. I've gotten my first book published, and I'm well into working on the next book. And I can only hope that by the time that one's published, which hopefully that won't take 6 years also, we'll be able to have events in person. This is lovely and warm, but I wish that we were crowding Annie Bloom's in person. So definitely it motivates me even more to see that it's possible, that I did it and I can do it again. And my friends that are writers are doing it too. So I'm really excited.
That's a good lead into a question that's in the chat from August Cabrera. What's next after Mr. Lucky?
That's a great question.
Book.
So at the very end of this book, we meet a character named Molly, and not her real name. And she plays an important role in ending this book. And then the next book, my intention for the next book was that it would be about the next year that I spent engaging with Molly and doing what I refer to as embodied grief work, basically using BDSM and kink to process the grief of my sister's death, other losses that happened that year, including my mom dying during that next year, 14 months after my sister died. And so I was pretty convinced that that was going to be the next book until I started really working on it in earnest this spring during COVID with a book coach. And she was sneaky and helped the book interview me. And it turns out actually the book is not all about that other relationship. The book is actually about the things that I'm grieving, and more about those relationships with the people that I have loved and lost. And Molly's character is definitely in some of those stories, and she'll be woven into that. But actually I am a bigger character, and the people that I have loved and lost play more of a role in that. So I'm really excited. The second book is still deciding everything it wants to be. So we'll see what happens.
Meg, you said earlier that when you were putting Mr. Lucky together that you knew you wanted to have the epistolary thread, like right from the rip? Are there ingredients that book 2 is already telling you are going to be the elements that kind of have the heat to the story?
That's a great question. So originally, when I thought it was all going to be about the relationship with Molly, you know, the obsessive qualities that show up in A Year of Mr. Lucky, I didn't lose those in the next year. So it was very possible that book 2 could have continued that theme. But a lot of the emotional work that I did with Molly, you know, we did some really intense emotional scenes about my grieving and how I was processing that. And that all sounds really vague, but that's what was happening. And so some of those scenes and the ways that I was learning to process my emotion through my body, that's a really big theme in the next book, even without all of it being about her.
Very cool.
We got some more questions in the chat. Lane Wells asks, Meg, what is your favorite part of the book?
Well, that's hard to say. There are some of the moments of banter between he and I that I just love. It still cracks me up, some of the things that he and I wrote to each other or said to each other in person. It's part of what I loved about interacting with him, is that we just had a lot of fun. I do really like the way the book ends. You know, as I was writing it, I had no idea where it was going to end. How far into my life was I supposed to take it? And the ending, when the final scene of the book happened with Molly, I knew that it did what I wanted it to do, and I knew that that was the end of the book. And it was such a relief, because I really needed a place to end the book. So I do like the ending of the book as well.
Christy Tate has a good question here. Hi, Meg, what happens when your patients find this memoir and want to discuss in a session?
It's such an appropriate question for you of all people to ask, Christy.
In a group session?
I don't run groups, thankfully.
Right.
I have a little bit, it's like a tiny sliver of something like anonymity, because the name that I use to publish my writing is the name I grew up with. That's my family name from my childhood. But it's not the name that I use in my clinical practice. My legal name is both Weber and Jeske, so it's tiny, that little thread of privacy, but it's there. And I actually so far have only told one of my clients that I wrote a book. There's just a lot of overlap with this person, and everyone else, I'm just hoping they don't connect the dots between Weber and Jeske, and that they don't figure it out. If they do, we've talked about other awkward stuff in my office. I'm sure I can handle it, but I'm hoping that it isn't something that I have to address too much.
All right. And from Adam Swanson, can you tell us about what it felt like to get your book deal? What kind of work led up to that moment, and what was it like after that moment?
Oh, great questions, Adam. Thank you. I tried to go the traditional route of getting an agent for my book, and I did my research and I tried to connect with people that I thought would be a really good fit. And I had a really close near miss with the first agent I sent my book to, who loved the book, read it in one weekend, but didn't appreciate basically my character's lack of strength and self-confidence, I think is what she said. And there wasn't anything I could do about that. I was the person I was when I wrote this book. And so she passed, and I ended up approaching, I think I stopped after 40 agents and other small presses that I tried for. And then I had Sincere Publishing, who published this book. They had accepted a couple of pieces of mine in standalone pieces in anthologies. So I thought, well, she must like my writing. So maybe, and the press is really focused on kink and other erotic writing. So I thought, well, the kink isn't going to scare her away as an editor, so I'll give it a shot. And I got really lucky. Sienna, the editor, really liked my book and liked the story, and it fit within their models. So she was willing to pick it up if I cut out a whole bunch of email. So
Nothing's free, Meg.
nothing at all.
Alyssa Wald has a question. Is there a special vulnerability or tension if you imagine your patients, clients reading this memoir? Oh, I guess we covered that. To me, this seems like the bravest part of the bravest imaginable work.
Thank you, Alyssa. I think for me, the reason I don't want my clients reading it is because I want to protect the space for my clients to have their experience in therapy. And I don't expect that my desires or these stories that I wrote are so salacious that they would distract my clients entirely, but I don't need them to be thinking about what I like. I want them to have their safe space to do the work that they need to do. And they don't need my specific stories in their mind as they do that. So that's what I worry about.
All right, Crystal Lee Quibell, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. What did your editing process look like through each draft to get to the final polished version?
That's a great question. When I finished my first full draft, like I said, I wrote it in the literary kitchen with Ariel Gore, and then I needed brand new eyes on it. So I went through the process of hiring an editor that had never seen any of my writing before. That's a whole big long story about the relationship that came out of that editing relationship. And so I'm not going to go into all of that, but then I worked with a few other writers that I really trust and respect. And I kept going back through it and tightening the language. Maybe I was constructing those sentences, as you say, Josh, and really pulling out as much of what didn't need to be there as possible. And then also taking the source material that I had, like those blog posts that became the shorter pieces, and really doing the hard work of making them pieces of writing that belonged in a book and not just, my thoughts in the moment when I was in the emotion of it. Once upon a time early in the process, I thought, look, I have all this writing that's already done for the book. No, I had source material that I had to go back. I see you laughing, Josh. And I had to go back and do the work to turn it into something that could be a book like this.
All right, another question here we have from Casey Markarian. Meg, I'm still wiping my eyes from your beautiful words. I agree, you're totally a fucking sentence architect. Does your teenager know about the book? How have you navigated that?
Oh, great question, Casey. So they've heard the buzz about the fact that there's something exciting happening for Momo, and they're here. They're in their bedroom across the apartment with their door closed and headphones on, and I'm in my bedroom. And when I told them about the book and that they would need to, I wanted them to be in their room, I said, the book, it kind of has some adult content and it's just not really for you. And they said, that's okay. I wouldn't really want to read a book you wrote anyway. So, so I took that as what it is. And also they are only obsessed with horror books and movies right now. And I won't ever write that. So I might be safe from them reading my writing for a good long time.
Let's see, Tanya Friedman. What did you learn from writing this book that you're taking with you to the next books?
Oh, I don't even know. That's such a good question, Tanya. I think probably the idea that when I think it's done and when I think it's ready, I'm wrong. That there's still more to go through. There's still language that I can tighten. There's still more sensory detail I can put in there. And there's probably more difficult truth that I can put on the page. There's a way to write things that I wouldn't say really any of my writing is particularly safe, but there are ways that I can make myself more vulnerable on the page. And that's usually what I'm striving to do. So if the first few passes are not to the heart of something, then I need to keep going until I get to it.
Let's see. And I think one last question here in the chat so far. Nicole, Michelle, at what point did you realize that this story was going to become a book?
I would say probably the story that I read, scene number 1, that was the first time we met in person. And every time he and I would play, I would come home and either that night or the next day, I would write down everything I remembered about it. Most of the dialogue in the book is actually what we said. A lot of memoirists make up dialogue as a necessity, but I just spilled it all out right away. And so I think I knew after that first night for sure that I was going to have to do something with all of this pretty early on.
All right. Let's see. Sarah Case asks, what advice would you give aspiring memoirists? Thanks, Chris.
To me, the most important part is having a community of other writers that I trust, other writers whose memoir and writing that I will read and learn from, but also people who will read my stories and talk with me about it and let me be in their process as well. Writing can be a really solitary process. And I think for me, the thing that made this into a book and helped me keep going were the other writers that I admire and that were in workshop with me that just kept showing me that it's possible. You know, every time I'm in a writing class or I see a friend of mine publish an essay, it just keeps telling me that it's possible. So for me, being connected to writing community, thankfully I live in Portland. There's so much writing community here. And also, you know, folks I've met in other places, but having that community and people that I could trust has been the most important part for me. That's what I would recommend.
Absolutely. Let's see. Lisa, you may not know this. Lisa Sinnott wants to know if the book is available in Canada or if she should get the ebook there.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if it's available in Canada or not, but the ebook I'm sure is. So.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Annie Blooms does not ship to Canada. You may have already figured that out, but so sorry about that. I am going to throw the link in the chat again. It's a good reminder there to where you can order the books if you're in America. Yeah, you can probably get the ebook. I would imagine maybe even through Annie Blooms if you're in Canada. I'm not totally sure about that. Hopefully. And Don Tyree, did you find yourself going even deeper with edits, rereads?
I think in this book, I definitely did. I went deeper into my experience in my family and how that helped me become the person that I am. I went deeper into what was actually happening, what I, you know, again, maybe I didn't want to share everything in the first place, but as I went back through it, I had to dig a little deeper to the stories that might have been underneath the first couple layers that I shared. So the editing process was part of that.
And Heidi Schumann, how do you think your feelings for Mr. Lucky have changed over time and with writing your book?
Oh, I think writing this book did several things. It helped me, that's probably the wrong verb, stay really focused on him way longer than I needed to be because I had to be so involved in our story to write it as a book. But I do also think that spending that much focused time on him as a character and him as a person also helped me get over him. It finally did the thing where I was able to let him go. And, he's just a guy that I was involved with. And he and I are friends in a loose sort of way. We don't see each other. Well, I don't see anybody right now because of COVID, but we don't see each other much. But we're friendly, and he's excited about the book. He said nice things about it when he read it before it got published. And it helped bring him back down to size as just a person instead of all the other things that I projected onto him while we were involved.
Monica Welty has a question. Have you had a lot of conversations with your friends and family about the content of the book? How are you feeling about people close to you knowing this intimate and personal information about yourself?
That was the part I was most scared about publishing this book, because lots of people in my life didn't know these things about me, didn't know that I was ever involved with men, didn't know that I am kinky, and that was scary for me. I have been clear all along, I'm not ashamed of anything that I've done or written about, but the opinions of people close to me really matter to me, my family especially. And I miss my parents very much. I'm really grateful that I didn't have to have these conversations with them. I had a difficult conversation with my dad about my writing about kink way early on. And it turned out into a beautiful moment between he and I, where he told me that even though he didn't agree with what I was writing or why anybody would write about that stuff, that there was never going to be a line that I crossed that meant he didn't love me. So if I had to have a difficult conversation with my dad about my writing, that was worth it to get to that. My siblings have been really supportive of me. That doesn't mean they're going to read it necessarily. I think that might be a relief, but I know that they love me, and that as far as I can tell, this isn't, them knowing these details about me doesn't change that. So I feel really grateful for their love and support, and the love and support of all the people that are here that showed up on a Monday night to listen to me launch this book. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Congratulations, Meg. I gotta go pick my daughter up.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, thanks everyone so much for coming tonight. And thank you, Meg, for bringing this to Annie Blooms. It was really wonderful to share this with you. And as librarian Chris Myers suggests, IndieBound is a great place to go to get books. If you are not near Annie Blooms, if you are near Annie Blooms, then you can go to this link and pre-order both of them or either of them, and we would very much appreciate it. Thanks everyone so much for coming tonight. Hope to see you at a future event, and have a really good night.
Yes, thank you all so much.
Good night.
Good night.